Here's what's coming up on The World Today. COVID-19 cases in Latin America are spiking as Brazil records over 50,000 deaths. The World Health Organization says the world lacks global leadership in fighting the coronavirus. Plus, the U.S. Congress is divided on a police reform bill as Democrats and Republicans work on their own agenda. A warm welcome this rainy afternoon here in Lagos. I'm Akaite Afia. Thanks for joining us. More than 50,000 COVID-19 deaths in Brazil, leading concerns over how the region is dealing with the coronavirus. There has been growing political tension in the country as it confirmed more than 1 million coronavirus infections. Meanwhile, other parts of the region are struggling to beat the pandemic.
Peru is the second worst affected country in Latin America with more than 250,000 cases and more than 8,000 COVID-related deaths. Despite a continuing rise in cases, the government has brought forward the planned reopening of shopping centers and hairdressers in most of the country. Chile is the latest country to surpass the number of cases in Italy, an early hotspot of the pandemic. The death toll nearly doubled over the weekend after the government changed the way it tallies the figures to include probable fatalities from COVID-19. Chile currently has 242,355 cases with 4,479 deaths. Over in Mexico, fewer cases have been recorded than both Peru and Chile, but its death toll is much higher, with more than 21,000 fatalities. Just under half of all Mexican states, including Mexico City, are still in the red zone, under the highest alert, with bars and cinemas closed and sporting events cancelled. Mexico has recorded 180,545 infections. In Europe, citizens of Spain are overjoyed as the country reopened its borders for the first time since the lockdown implemented in March. Spain has also lifted its state of emergency, allowing people across the country to finally be reunited. The country's total cases sit at 246,272, with 28,323 deaths. In Asia, South Korean health officials believe that the country is experiencing a second wave of the coronavirus infections. Officials said that in the past 24 hours, 17 new cases have been recorded, stemming from different clusters in large warehouses and offices. South Korea has recorded 280 deaths with just over 12,000 cases in the region.
The World Health Organization has identified the lack of global leadership and unity to fight the coronavirus as a much bigger problem than the outbreak itself. Director General Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, who did not elaborate, says the United States is too weak, too slow, and too China-centric in tackling the disease.
The greatest threat we face now is not the virus itself. It's the lack of global solidarity and global leadership. We cannot defeat this pandemic with a divided world. The world is in desperate need of national unity and global solidarity. The politicization of the pandemic has exacerbated it. Ultimately, the pandemic has shown that we are humanity, one humanity, and none of us are safe until all of us are safe.
International cooperation is crucial to this end. The world needs effective vaccine. And ladies and gentlemen, this outbreak is far from over. Norway will continue to work with others to ensure that we come out of this crisis as a stronger global community.
Over in the United States, the southeastern state of Florida recorded its single-day record of COVID-19 cases for the third day in a row after more businesses resume operations. The United States has over 2.27 million cases in total and about 120,000 deaths. The state of Florida announced new record numbers of COVID-19 cases on Friday and Saturday after allowing bars and restaurants and some theme parks to reopen. In addition, the hospitalizations continued their steady rise in many parts of the state, especially in Miami-Dade County. However, people in the Sunshine State are not social distancing.
It's dangerous, and I think it's increasing, and it'll get worse.
I think it's concerning, but I don't think we're getting all the facts. I think we need to know how much they've increased the testing, and if that's in proportion to how many more people are showing up positive.
Well, I think I agree with the governor that it's a lot to do with the testing, but I also think it's probably because a lot of the young people are tired of staying inside and everybody wants to get out and live their lives, as do I. I want to get out and live my life too.
Meanwhile, we've been making the move out of the city in New York because of COVID-19, not minding the stress involved. Take Rebecca Stevens-Walter, who never thought of leaving the city. She had a good life with her husband and 2 young children in Washington Heights neighborhood. But a stressful combination of a rent increase and a COVID-19 pandemic sent the family packing in mid-March. They are now living with Stevens-Walter's in-laws in New Mexico. Stevens-Walter, who works as a church consultant, said her oldest child did not adapt well to the new health guidelines aimed at slowing down the spread of the coronavirus announced in March.
At this point, we don't feel safe going back. And even at the point when we do feel safe going back, we feel like it probably will not be the same for a very long time. And to pay such an extremely large amount of money to live there and not really have it be the city that we want it to be and that we love it for, we sort of slowly realized and accepted we are not going back and this is it. So yeah, it was just sort of like a slow realization and a slow, like, we really have to accept it. And it was heartbreaking. I cried a lot. I cried all the time. I love New York, and it's just, yeah, it's done for us.
You know, there's a handful of agents that have told me they've gotten calls from, people who live in New York City who said, look, we're going to move. We want to leave the city. We're going to go someplace else. I think it hasn't been ideal, but I do think people want to be in New York City. And I do think there's people that are tried and true New Yorkers that will commit and stay here. And there's some that are going to leave because they don't want to be in vertical living. They don't want to be in an elevator with other people. They don't want to raise kids here. That's part of what happens during a time like this. But I do think we'll get back to a better place. But right now, the economy, I mean, everything is a challenge. For us to sit here and think everything's going to be great in 2 months, that's just not reasonable.
A New York police officer has been suspended after a video posted online appeared to show him putting a black man in a chokehold during an arrest. The New York Police Department banned the use of chokeholds in 1993. The death of George Floyd after a police officer knelt on his neck while detaining him in Minneapolis on May 25th has put police tactics and methods in the spotlight again. The video posted online showed many officers restraining the man on his stomach. One officer appeared to have his arm wrapped around the man's neck, as the video shows. U.S. Democrats and Republican lawmakers are working on 2 different bills for the police reform in the United States, following anti-racism protests that have swept over the country and have now gone global. The Democrat-led U.S. House of Reps and the Republican-led Senate are set to take key votes this week on the reforms. The push for legislation came after the death in police custody of African-American George Floyd. The impetus for the nationwide and worldwide protests of racism and the use of force by law enforcement officers. A key divide between the Democratic and Republican proposals is on the issue of qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that makes it more difficult for people to file lawsuits against the police officers when they feel their civil rights have been violated. Democrats want to end qualified immunity, but Republican leaders have opposed doing so, and the White House has labeled the issue a non-starter for President Donald Trump. Joining us now is Catherine Jibsen, a VOA congressional correspondent. Catherine, thanks for joining us on the program today.
You're so welcome.
So let's start. As the United States Congress begins to discuss police reform, what is currently being proposed on the sides of the Democrats and the Republicans?
Well, those two separate proposals I mentioned are very similar in some of their foundational ideas. This idea that police need to be held accountable in this country and that the U.S. government can leverage the federal aid that they send to local police departments to get these results out of the police. So a lot of these proposals are looking at having accountability databases, making sure that bad cops in one police department won't be fired from that police department and then be able to go over to another one. There will also be a lot of use of body cameras, a lot of training, enhanced training for police officers. But as you mentioned, what is really cool is get lawmakers tripped up on all this is the issue of chokeholds and the issue of qualified immunity. That's the debate that we're going to be seeing on Capitol Hill this week.
Well, so how difficult is it to get legislation passed, especially with such strong opposing views? And does that pressure of the current climate in the United States play a role in that?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually kind of incredible that we're debating this at all in a presidential election year. Historically in the United States, big, ambitious legislation that proposes changes like these nationwide just does not come up. Remember that a third of the U.S. Senate is running for re-election in just 4 months. The entire U.S. House of Representatives is running for re-election. All of these people are in really tough elections where some of them are running either for or against President Donald Trump, who, of course, really inflames the passions of voters on both sides. To really put themselves out on a limb and take this big political risk on such a controversial issue having to do with racism, having to do with police enforcement, that is a big ask for lawmakers, and they're going to have to find a way to compromise with each other on some of these key issues so that it can pass the U.S. Congress and make it to the White House, where President Trump will have to decide if he wants to sign something like that.
So with the presidential election quickly approaching in November, how does this crunch time play a role in creating new legislation?
Well, most of all, I think we need to look at the nationwide protests. The pressure that those protests are putting on lawmakers to do something, people are saying, look, we want the Democrats, we will vote for the Democrats, but they need to show some action. They need to show some results. They need to show that they can go up against the Republicans and get results. And then on the Republican side, a lot of Republicans are looking at some really difficult polling numbers. Right now, President Donald Trump nationwide, by all accounts, is running about 20 points behind Vice President Joe Biden, who is, of course, the Democratic nominee. They're worried that if they can't get people to the polls and show results, they're going to have some historic losses in November. So even though it's politically risky on both sides, it also benefits both sides to be able to point to a significant piece of legislation and say, hey, look, this is what we accomplished in an election year.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Catherine.
You're so welcome.
And still to come on The World Today, blues musicians in an Italian lakeside town came up with a novel way to please fans despite coronavirus restrictions. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. South Africa's former president, F.W. de Klerk, has withdrawn from a U.S. seminar where he was to speak on the rule of law, racism, and minority rights. His foundation said the former apartheid leader did not want to embarrass himself or his host at the American Bar Association in the current charged racial climate. South African media say the withdrawal was after several rights groups opposed his participation. The Klerk Foundation was said to allegation was he involved in gross violation of human rights and it was baseless. The ABA has since confirmed his withdrawal from the July 1st event. Mr. de Klerk was the head of the South Africa's white minority government until 1994. In the United Kingdom, students and staff paid tribute to teacher James Furlong, who was killed during the reading attack over the weekend. Colleagues and students shared a minute's silence as they mourned the 36-year-old Furlong, the head of the history, government, and politics at the Holt School in nearby Wokingham. Fellow teachers and pupils paid tribute to Furlong, describing him as a wonderfully talented and inspirational and an amazing teacher. He was also among the 3 killed after a man wielding a knife went on a rampage in the park on Saturday, June 22nd. Describing the incident as terrorism, police say they have detained a 25-year-old man and are not hunting others.
Just shocked. I just couldn't believe that we'd lost such a great teacher in such a horrific way. And I found out by seeing the email posted on Facebook and basically just couldn't handle it at all. I didn't believe it was real to begin with, but obviously it was an official email. And I couldn't sleep last night. I basically just couldn't stop thinking about it, and it was really hard for me to deal with. I did GCSE history, and basically when I went to go to the open day, Mr. Furlong was dressed as Henry VIII, trying to entice people to do GCSE history. And he always used to dress up in these wacky costumes. He had an army hat and a fake rifle that he'd wear on Remembrance Day, and he had like loads of weird outfits. He once came into our lesson in Year 8 when we were learning about the Victorians in a chimney sweep outfit, and started singing Chim Chimney, Chim Chim Chiroo from Mary Poppins. So it was kind of crazy. He was always really funny and weird, and he was just a great teacher and just encouraged people to love history.
The European Union and China were seeking to cool tensions during a video summit, their first formal talk since ties soured over European accusations that Beijing has spread disinformation about the novel coronavirus. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel, the EU's chief executive and chairman, held a video conference with Premier Li Qiang on Monday morning and were expected to have another one later in the day with President Xi Jinping. EU officials say China has sought to pressure EU countries that criticize its handling of the novel coronavirus, using social media to spread fake reports of European neglect of COVID-19 patients. Beijing has denied any wrongdoing. Even before the pandemic, the two trading partners had their differences, including over Hong Kong and an investment pact that is being negotiated. Moving over to the Korean Peninsula, residents living near the inter-Korea border held a rally against defector groups in the south planning to send propaganda leaflets into North Korea. Tension on the Korean Peninsula has been rising after the North blew up a joint liaison office and threatened military action over defectors sending anti-North leaflets across the border last week. A dozen of residents held up banners and chanted slogans such as "Quickly enact prohibition of sending leaflets to North Korea." The two Koreas, which are technically at war as their 1950 to 1953 conflict ended without a peace treaty, have waged leaflet campaigns for decades, but agreed to cease all hostile acts in a 2018 peace accord. Several defector-led groups have regularly sent back flyers together with food, $1 bills, mini radios, and USB sticks containing South Korean dramas and news, usually by balloon, over the border, or in bottles in rivers. Blues musicians in an Italian lakeside town came up with a novel way to please fans despite coronavirus restrictions. Strict social distancing rules are still in force, but bobbing along the calm lake with a backdrop of stunning mountains looked like a joyous way to perform within the guidelines for the musicians. More details now.
Music has been proven to promote healing and boost moods, and amidst the coronavirus pandemic, it may be needed now more than ever. Blues musicians have found a creative way to please fans in an Italian lakeside town by playing from borrowed fishing boats to a shoreside audience. Four small boats filled with guitars, harmonicas, microphones and battery-powered amplifiers cruised along the shoreline of the largest lake in Italy, Lake Trasimeno. Most of the music lovers in attendance followed social distancing rules and wore masks, with a few getting creative by paddleboarding closer to music but still keeping a safe distance. Organisers of the annual Trasimeno Blues Festival came up with the idea to allow people attend without the risk of being too close to each other. The extreme social distancing measure allowed fans to enjoy the 12-bar blues from dry land. Concerts were allowed to restart in Italy from June 15 as a part of the easing of their lockdown. This concert gives a taste of what the main festival set for August will be able to offer.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on The World Today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great week.